How's it going, everyone? This is Mike, and I wanted to take part in the weekly chat from the week that's just now ending. This is what early Sunday morning on March 18th. That's right. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day. I completely forgot. All right. So anyway, the topic for the chat this week was an idea from Ian, and he wanted to talk about Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton as sort of comparing the two of them. And I initially wasn't going to join in on this because I don't know enough about either one of these people to make any kind of an intelligent comparison, because I've only seen two of Buster Keaton's classic films. I saw Our Hospitality, which I saw in one of my film classes about a year ago, something like that. And I saw The General in a theater, big screen, complete with organ accompaniment and sound effects and people yelling and screaming in the theater. It was wonderful. I enjoyed both of those films thoroughly. So those are my only experiences of the classic Keaton. And as far as Chaplin, I've only seen, let me see now, in order, The Kid, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, and The Great Dictator. That's my only experience with Charlie Chaplin. So as far as talking intelligently about either one of these guys or making a comparison between the two, it's going to be kind of hard to do. But I didn't want to skip the chat this week because I appreciate James and Ian and anybody else who wants to get involved doing this, and I want to keep it going. So I just put my 2 cents, maybe just 1 cent, 1 cent, 1 cent to just get involved a little bit. So Ian was talking in his, he did a top 10 video yesterday, Saturday. He may have put it up on Friday, but I saw it on Saturday. Excuse me. His top 5 Buster Keaton films, and he said that as he watches more of Keaton and Chaplin, he realizes that he prefers Chaplin. He thinks that Keaton is more of a stuntman than, I guess, anything else, actor. I don't know. And I don't know. I think that Charlie Chaplin is more of a, at least from what I've seen, he's more of the well-rounded, consummate actor. He creates characters that are very emotional, and they can break your heart. I mean, certainly in films like The Great Dictator, wow, and Modern Times, City Lights. I mean, the characters in those films can really just grab at your heartstrings. And of course, he also is a genius at the physical kind of comedy. I think his physical comedy is a little bit different than Buster Keaton's from what I've seen. And there I go again, not having enough material to really make any kind of a judgment. But I think it's very easy to compare these two since they came from the same era. But they are very different kinds of artists. So maybe in a way it's not fair to say, well, I like one better than the other, because you can do that with any actors in any genre or any era. But I think that in this case, since most of us just don't know that much about silent films, certainly I don't, and I truly admire Ian's passion and his interest in silent films, and it's he knows a lot about these things. So I have a lot to learn. I have a lot of films to watch, and I've never seen any of Chaplin's short films or Keaton's, the comedy shorts. Haven't seen any of those. And now I decided to find out some information about these guys. So I went on to Wikipedia and the Internet Movie Database, just reading some things about them, about their lives and careers, and looking at their filmographies. And there is so much information. We're literally volumes of information about these people during their long careers, because for Keaton it goes all the way back to 1917. For Chaplin it goes all the way back to, I think, 1914. And it's, so I guess what I found most interesting about Keaton is the fact that after the sound era began, he kept working. He was working in a very prolific manner all through the 30s, the 40s, and then up into the 50s when he started working on television. And even for a while, he even had his own show, the Buster Keaton Show, live television in 1950, which was only seen on on some California stations. And I guess there was only one kinescope made, so a lot of this stuff is not available. But I guess there was a compilation film made that was only shown in the United Kingdom, may be available somewhere, and it was called The Misadventures of Buster Keaton. And then he tried to have another television show in the early 50s, which didn't go over quite as well, but he kept working. Now, he had a lot of financial setbacks in his early life. He had a couple of very bad marriages that took away his fortune, and left him not only destitute, but he had a growing alcohol problem. So I guess he kept working because he had to. He didn't have any choice. But he did a lot of comedy shorts during the 1930s, and he started working in feature films, small parts, and just kept himself going. And then the 50s came around, he started working on television. And he also, I did not know, because I've never seen Limelight, directed by Charlie Chaplin, but I did not know that Chaplin put him in that movie. I guess they appeared together at the very end. I need to see this. But I guess Chaplin was, he was a good friend of Keaton, and he was concerned about Keaton going through a bad time in his life, so he made sure that he got him into this film. Now, I have seen Buster Keaton. Of course, I saw him in Sunset Boulevard, and which is about 3 hot seconds, but it's really funny. And then he made 4 films for American International Pictures in the 1960s. He did 3 of the Beach Party films. He did Pajama Party in 1964. Then he did Beach Blanket Bingo and How to Stuff a Wild Bikini in 1965. Then he did another film, which was also in 1965, and had a lot of the Beach Party actors in it. It was called Sergeant Deadhead. So he did all 4 of those films, and I was reading about that. I guess William Asher, who directed most of these Beach Party films at AIP, said that he loved working with Buster Keaton, and he kept coming up with good ideas. And all the young players in the films, once they realized who Buster Keaton was, they all just loved him. And he worked with he worked very well with some of the other comedians in those films, like Buddy Hackett and Paul Lynde. They just got along with him very, very well. So his last film was in 1966. It was a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, and he died later on in 1966. And he also worked in another short comedy film in 1965, which I think he also directed. It was called The Railrodder, and I would kind of like to see that. He also appeared in a 1949 MGM musical called In the Good Old Summertime, which starred Judy Garland and Van Johnson. And I guess not only did he act in the film, but I was reading that he directed the very first scene that had Judy Garland and Van Johnson meeting each other, where they bumped into each other on the street. And he kept coming up with other comedy bits for the 2 of them during the film. So that was kind of interesting that he was very active in helping that film to get made, not just acting in it. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. And Charlie Chaplin worked, let's see, altogether Charlie Chaplin only made something like, I think it was 11 feature films during his career, starting in the 1920s after he got done doing all the short films. And he, of course, he directed all of his own films. And, he must have saved his money, I'll tell you, because he did work very infrequently, even and in spite of all of his marriages and his lawsuits and all sorts of troubles with the American government, all kinds of things that happened to him. He didn't work that much, at least in films, up until the end of his life. His last film was A Countess in Hong Kong, which was, the late 60s, I believe, maybe 1970, something like that. I'm not sure, which I didn't see. But so I need to learn a lot more. Now, as far as Harold Lloyd, I'm trying to think. I may have seen Harold Lloyd's last film, which he made in 1947. It's called The Sin of Harold Diddledock, and I think I may have seen that on television way, way back in the day. I guess Harold Lloyd owned the copyright to all of his films, the films that had survived. Most of his silent films and his short films have been burned in a fire in his home in 1943. But his feature films, I guess he managed to keep those safe, and he owned the copyrights. And I guess for some reason he didn't want them to be shown on television. So and maybe until after his death, and I think they were starting to be released into television, but I've never seen any of them. He made films through the 1930s. I think the last film he made in that decade was 1938. Then did not make the other film until 1947. So I don't know much about Harold Lloyd at all, really. And his career goes all the way back to 1912. I read. First, I read that it was 1913, but then I said he started making these very primitive type films in 1912. So, you know, I have a lot to learn. So, anyway, that's just my very, very bad contribution to this week's chat, which I just wanted to get my foot in the door. So, let me know what you think about Keaton and Lloyd and Chaplin, or do you think about them at all? I guess the only silent player that I'm kind of obsessed with right now is Louise Brooks, well, she actually dated Charlie Chaplin for a while, but that has nothing to do with any of this. Okay, good night. See you tomorrow.